Hello, scholars. Welcome to our next history lesson. It's our first lesson in our next study in history this year, the study of the American Revolution. Welcome to lesson number 1. A quick note about our study of the American Revolution before we get started. The first half of our study focuses on events that lead up to the Revolutionary War. The second half of our study will look at key battles, people, and other events that take place during the Revolutionary War. So, this first half, the first probably about 10 lessons, really relate to events and feelings that lead up to the war itself that is called the American Revolution. So, our objectives for today: we will review what life in the colonies was like for children, and we will learn about cures for illnesses in the colonies. Just today, setting us some good background of what life was like in the colonies as we get near the Revolutionary War. So, we start today's lesson on a pleasant summer day in 1750. A ship carrying 400 people from Germany has arrived at the docks in the city of Philadelphia. These 400 newcomers are about to begin new lives in the British colonies in America. Now, this isn't actually the biggest deal in 1750. If it had been 100 years earlier, 1650, the arrival of 400 immigrants would have been a big addition to any colony and been big news. But by 1750, it was very common for a ship to arrive with immigrants each week. So, what is an immigrant? An immigrant is a person from one country who comes into another country to live. Perhaps you are wondering, from where were the immigrants coming? And why were they coming to the 13 British colonies in America? Well, let's start with why they were coming to the 13 British colonies. The answer lies really in one word: opportunity. The opportunity to own their own land, opportunity for jobs in the growing towns and cities, opportunity to worship as they pleased, and simply opportunity for a fresh start in their lives. These were all among the reasons why immigrants were coming to live in the colonies. And now, where were those immigrants coming from? Well, the answer to that: many places. Of the colonists who were living in the colonies, most were from England, right? Britain. They are British colonies in America, after all. But not all of them were coming from England. Immigrants from Germany made up the next largest group of colonists. So, people from Germany coming to live in the British colonies in America. There were also immigrants from Sweden, Holland, France, and the Scots Irish people. Those are Scottish people who were living in the northern part of Ireland. Also living in the colonies, but were forced to be there, were enslaved Africans. Enslaved Africans accounted for 1 out of every 5 people living in the colonies. Now, remember, they were forced to be there. They weren't choosing to leave Africa and come to the New World for these opportunities that we talked about. These are people being forced to come to the colonies and work. So we wouldn't call them immigrants, they were enslaved. It's also important to note and remember that also living in the colonies, not immigrating, were the indigenous native people who were already living in North America when colonists began to settle the land. So, scholars, take a moment and look at those groups of people that are making up the population of the 13 British colonies in America. As we learned in our previous lesson, by 1750, there were 13 British colonies in North America: Massachusetts, Virginia, New Hampshire, Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Perhaps you remember the 13 Colonies song and want to review it to help you remember those 13 colonies. By 1750, there were 5 cities in the 13 colonies: Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, and Charleston. And there were a handful of towns. It's important to remember, scholars, that most of the colonists were farmers. So the colonies were mainly made up of villages and farms. But as you just heard, 5 cities have grown up now in the colonies, have developed. Philadelphia became the second largest city in the British Empire, even though it is not actually in Great Britain, but is in one of its colonies. That's pretty interesting. Imagine the second largest city in your kingdom isn't actually in the physical land of your country, it's in a whole different land. I find that pretty fascinating. Now, before we continue, Philadelphia became the second largest city in Britain's empire. Do you remember which city in Britain's empire is the largest? So, if Philadelphia is the second largest, which one is the first largest? I'll give you a hint. It's actually in England or Great Britain. Hmm. Did you say London? That's right. As we have also learned in earlier lessons, when we were comparing and contrasting colonial life with life today, life in the colonies for children of the colonists was very difficult. Your house was likely crowded. Right? It was probably a big family. Your siblings were most likely your playmates and friends because most of you would have lived on farms and the next closest house would be too far away to easily play with friends. You had many chores, and it's possible you didn't get to go to school. Remember, we learned that most children, right, started out at just dame school, being taught by their mother or a neighborhood mother. And if you were lucky enough to go on to formal schooling after that, only boys for quite a while were allowed to do so. Some of the possible chores, take a look at those. Maybe pause for a moment, read through those chores that you might have had. Any of those sound like something you'd have fun doing? Perhaps. If you were the child of enslaved Africans, your life was even more difficult than that of being a child of colonists. By the age of 10 or 11, you started working in the fields, doing the same hard work as adults who were enslaved, from sun up to sundown. And that's not much older than you are right now, scholars. Imagine having to work in the fields just like you were an adult from the time the sun was up to the time the sun went down. Here are some additional chores that you would be expected to do if you were the child of enslaved Africans. And keep in mind, you could be severely punished for not working fast enough or not working hard enough, even though you're only 10 or 11 years old. In addition to life being very difficult and there being a lot of work to do, it was also very easy for people to get sick in the colonies. There was not the same knowledge about illnesses and disease as there is today, and there certainly was not the same technology and care available in the 1700s. Doctors at the time were not much more educated or knowledgeable than anyone else. No one really knew much about why people got sick or how they could get well. Some people, however, thought they knew a lot and could convince other people to listen to them and believe what they were saying. Some of these people and their ideas were very unique ways of curing illnesses. Listen to some ideas that people had to help cure illnesses in the 1750s. Let's say you're feeling a bit tired. Roast a toad, grind it up, and add it to boiling water to make a kind of tea. Drink it, and you will feel lively in no time. Hmm. Scholars, maybe you're feeling a little bit tired right now while you're working on this. Would you be willing to drink that tea to help you feel a little more lively? I thought not. What about if you have a cold or a sore throat? Sprinkle pepper on a piece of meat and wrap the meat around your throat. Your cold or sore throat will soon be gone. Hmm. None of us have probably tried that when we've had a cold or sore throat. Let's continue. How about curing a fever? Step 1. Clip your toenails and put them into a small linen bag. Tie the bag, step 2. Tie the bag around the neck of an eel. Step 3. Put the eel in a tub of water. And step 4. When the eel dies, your fever will go down. Raise your hand if your family's done that to help cure you of a fever. Hmm. No one? No hands are up? That's too bad. I wonder how your family helped you get rid of your fever then. So, the best advice was for parents to just keep their children healthy so they didn't get a fever, a sore throat, a cold, or just feel tired and fatigued. So, here was advice given to parents to help keep their children healthy. Some of them might fit still today. Listen. Number one, feed your children only plain foods and not much sugar, spice, or salt. No eating between meals except for dry bread. Number two, keep them away from candy. Yep, that's right, scholars. Halloween now canceled. Boo ah ah. Number three, see that they sleep on a hard bed. No soft feathers. Number four, bathe them in cold water, even in the winter. Number five, give them very thin shoes that will leak and let in water. Now, scholars, there's a little background to that one. A man who considered himself well educated noticed that children of families that were poor were often running around barefoot and didn't seem to get sick. So he recommended that shoes be thin and that water can leak into them. It didn't seem to make the children of poor people sick. So it would probably be okay for everyone to help keep them healthy. Number six, strawberries, cherries, and gooseberries are good for children. Melons, peaches, plums, and grapes are not. Hmm. Do you feel like any of those would help keep you healthy? Do any of those sound like they'd be really hard to follow? I would not want to bathe in cold water. And it would be a little hard for me to probably stay away from candy if chocolate is a candy. Eeh. All right, scholars. Our objectives for today. What we learned about. We reviewed what life in the colonies was like for children, and we learned about cures for illnesses in the colonies. Scholars, today's lesson, our first in our study of the American Revolution, is a good way to transition from what we were studying into the operating and running of the 13 colonies leading up to the American Revolution. We will get into some meatier work in the next lesson. I hope you enjoyed this review today and found the illness cures as entertaining as I did. All right, now for the assignment. Open the attached Google form to answer the questions about today's lesson. Now, remember, you may look back at today's lesson for help. Think of it as a scavenger hunt. Back up, look at the info again, listen to pieces of information again if you need to. Remember, click the submit button at the bottom of the Google form to send your answers to your teacher when you're finished. Good luck, and thanks for listening again today.